What is sacred sexuality? It's one of those terms that we hear very often. You've probably seen it online, attached to tantra workshops, to new age retreats or spiritual influences, talking about divine union, eye gazing, and this kind of thing. And on one level, that's beautiful. It shows that people are starting to wake up to the idea that sex can be something more, that there is a deeper, mysterious dimension available through this part of our lives. And at the same time, on another level, most of what gets called sacred sexuality out there in the world barely scratches the surface. It's often romanticized, very aesthetic, and even performative, like a new age kind of spiritual theater that can feel profound and looks or sounds spiritual in a certain way. But if we peel back the lid and look at what's underneath, it's rarely transformative, or it's an imitation or a shadow of the real thing. Because the truth is that sacred sexuality isn't about how something looks, it's about the quality of consciousness that is brought into it. It's not about techniques, it's not about rituals. It's an inner realization. It's a way of relating to sexuality, towards your partner, and ultimately towards life itself as something mysterious and divine. And so that's what I want to explore in this episode. What actually makes something sacred? What does it mean to approach sex as a spiritual path rather than just a physical or emotional or relational experience? And over the last 10 years, I've been walking this path myself, from my own initiations into tantric yoga and sacred sexuality, when I started traveling to India, as well as the deeper integration work that has followed since then. It's been an ongoing journey. And while that initial foray into sacred sexuality opened up extraordinary dimensions of pleasure and intimacy and energy, it also revealed a lot of the shadow, the ego, and the bypassing that can creep into sexuality that becomes spiritualized. So today I want to walk you through my understanding of it, beyond the buzzwords, beyond the workshops and the spiritual aesthetics, into the real essence of what sacred sexuality actually means, as well as how we can actually start to relate to it in this way, and how it can become a path of awakening in your life. So that's what we're going to be tackling today. If you're new here, welcome to Awakened Evolution. My name is Jasper Brown. And I want to start by setting this up by understanding what actually makes something sacred in the first place. This is a word that we hear. It's common. It's in the common vernacular to say something is sacred. But what does it actually mean? Typically, I think we associate this word sacred with spiritual traditions. It's a certain ritual or a certain practice that has been honed and developed over thousands of years. And it's often held within a certain frame of a certain specific belief system. Whether that's a church, a monastery, a temple, a form of prayer, a specific book, or a specific person, a specific guide or guru. But what is it really? Because it might be some of those things, but it can also not be those things. And as I was sitting down to contemplate this topic, as I do before I talk about anything, I think about it a lot. I try to think about it as much as I can to really bring my own insight and my own view into this. And as I was sitting down to contemplate what it is that makes something sacred, I sort of discovered or understood that it's a certain reverence, it's a certain state of reverence and devotion that we bring that allows us to recognize the divinity or the mysterious dimensions within that which we so-called think of as ordinary experiences, or the ordinary frame that we look at reality through, as if we have a certain set of lenses on and we see reality in a certain way. To perceive something as sacred is to be able to pierce through that and sort of contact the underlying fabric. So it's not about dogma. It's not about tradition. Although often those things come in the same basket, fundamentally it's about a quality of awareness that is able to orient us towards the mystical or the spiritual dimensions of life. Now, I know for some of you that's going to sound a bit like woo, religious woo. But we need to remember that all religion, despite the many flaws and corruptions that religion has accumulated in the structures and the conventions and the traditions throughout, the thousands of years that most of them have been around, they all point towards a fundamental truth. There's an essence. There's something being communicated there. There's a truth that all of these different cultures across the world and across time have tried to communicate, have tried to point us towards. In Hinduism, it's the divine play. It's lila, as it's known. It's God experiencing itself through creation, including desire. In Taoism, it's the balance of yin and yang. It's the dance of the opposites as the eternal sort of flow or emergence of life. In Tantra, it's every aspect of reality, even the erotic, is a manifestation of the absolute or the divine. And so we can see the divine in even the most lowly, base, animalistic things that exist. In Christian mysticism, it's seeing the body as a temple of the Holy Spirit and the meeting of your soul as an act of devotion. So they're all kind of pointing towards the same absolute truth. Of course, all of it gets layered and corrupted and jumbled and confused and diluted over thousands of years because there's humans involved, and humans will always corrupt. The selfish nature of the ego is always going to corrupt whatever societal structure that we create in order to serve its own selfish agenda. And that's why Christians think that Christianity is the one true religion, and Muslims think that Islam is the only way, and the Quran is the only holy book. And if you don't align with it, then you're going to go to hell, or you're going to get smote by God at some point. You will meet a retribution. So every sort of religious frame gets co-opted to serve the needs and to serve the survival agenda of the people that hold those beliefs. And so we can obviously see that there's a problem with that. There's a limitation with that, because if we want to rise above the individualistic frames of one specific religion and get to the essence of every religion, which is that they're all pointing towards something. They're all pointing towards the same thing, even though they've got locked in a certain frame or paradigm or become dogmatic. There's a kernel of truth that they were all founded on in the beginning. Whoever it was that started a specific religion had a profound insight, had a penetrating revelation into the truth or the nature of reality, around which galvanized a following and a bunch of teachings. And then, of course, over the thousands of years, those teachings get corrupted, they get tarnished, they get warped and changed, and so many different voices and authors and men rewrite it, and change it, and it evolves. It's something that continues to evolve, and over time it drifts. The message gets very diluted over the years, and it drifts further and further away from the truth. So it's important that we don't just believe religion. We don't want to have blind faith, which is actually a huge mistake. Blind faith is not what we want, because that's bad epistemology. And epistemology is the study of how do we know what we know? How do we discover what is true? What's the method for truth seeking? And just believing religion, just believing other people is hearsay. We don't actually know if it's true. We don't actually know if the book was written by those people, that person, by the prophet, or by Jesus, or by Muhammad, or whoever it was. We don't actually know. We need to keep an open mind and see that potentially there is wisdom there. Potentially there's a truth there. It's a lead. Given that there's thousands of years of spiritual wisdom tradition, given that there are claims that many beings on certain paths have attained the state of enlightenment and discovered the absolute truth, that's a lead. That's an important bit of information that we take into our own process of sense making and see that there's something there for us. There might be something there for us. That there could be an important truth that we could discover. And so we need to keep an open mind. We don't want to fall into blind faith. We don't want to just follow it because other people do it and just conform. We want to question it for ourselves. We need to approach it like a student with an open mind and treat it like an experiment. We're going to approach it in a certain scientific way to see if we can repeat the experiment and we can validate that experiment through our own direct experience and thereby test the claim somehow. This is my approach. This is what I'm doing. So there is apparently an absolute truth or a higher truth that exists according to the wisdom traditions. And we're curious to see if that's the case. We're not going to dismiss it. We're actually going to entertain the possibility of it. And apparently there is a way of approaching sexuality in this way. According to certain specific wisdom traditions, sex can be a vehicle for discovering the absolute truth. And it turns out that this is actually a great experiment. First of all, because it's a deeply pleasurable one, and that experience of the pleasure helps us to access the emotional states that come with higher states of consciousness. As we experience pleasure and we experience deep intimacy with our beloved or with ourselves, it generates a state of awe, of reverence, devotion, ecstasy, and love. And if you think about it, the orgasm itself is this kind of, what is it? It's this experience of expansion. It's an ecstatic expansion. Almost like a mini awakening. And it sort of helps us to go from this very time-bound, survival-oriented state of being, which we are existing in most of the time, this normal state of being, otherwise known as the gross state of consciousness. And it allows us to experience a transition from this gross, normal, let's say, normal state of consciousness into a much more expanded, dissolved state where our boundaries kind of become blurry, and it opens the doorway into profound experiences, profoundly euphoric, blissful, expanded states, even if it's for a short period of time. So there's something there for us. There might be something there for us. Could be. And I'll share a little bit later on the exact process for approaching that. But first, I want to set it up properly and to make sure that we're sort of seeing this from a structural point of view, not just a content point of view, not just yeah. So I want to talk about the evolution of sexual consciousness first. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know I talk a lot about spiral dynamics and understanding the developmental stages of human evolution and consciousness itself. And so we have the 8 stages, which are given colors, which are beige, purple, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, and turquoise. And when it comes to sex and relating to this topic of sex, I think it's really important to bring this lens because it helps us to see the way that sexual or sexuality has evolved over time, the stages that humanity has gone through in its relationship to sex, and also where we're going. What's the next stage? What's the higher stages? What do they look like? What do they have to teach us? And by seeing the map, we can understand a lot of the limitations, a lot of the dysfunction, a lot of the restrictions or the obstacles in our way. And we can also see what the path looks like in order to transcend those obstacles, to integrate them or to include them and add on top. And thereby develop a much more integrative approach towards understanding what sexuality actually is and how it can be used as a profound path for development and growth. If you don't understand what I mean when I talk about the stages, you definitely want to go back and listen to the podcast episode I did on spiral dynamics. You can just type awakened evolution, spiral dynamics, or look at it on the list and listen to it. It'll help you understand this in a deeper way. You don't need to do that now, but you can always go back and listen to it, and it'll add a lot of layers of context, which will make this more profound, and your understanding of reality will be more complete with that. So I want to point out here that stage red, which is the stage that is basically concerned with power, control, sees sex as something, is a form of dominance in a certain way. It sees sex as something to take from others, and it becomes, sex is a tool of validation and control and power. Stage blue, which is what we typically think of as fundamentalist, fundamental religion, the normal sort of religious traditions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, these are all stage blue. Sex is often seen as something which is fairly taboo and sinful in a certain way. It's sort of like related to in a sort of puritanical, through the lens of the religion, which is often associated with repression, guilt, and it becomes something that we need to kind of hide. And there's a tension between it. Sex is seen as something that's useful for reproduction. Obviously, religions often want to have more followers, and so sex is encouraged, but it's also used as used as a way of controlling people. And this was necessary at a certain stage of human development. We didn't need people having, hedonistic sex everywhere. The religion as an institution was used as a tool for the state, as a method of actually engineering outcomes within society and controlling the way that people behaved. So if you can control people sexually, you've got them by the balls, quite literally. You can tell them what to do, you can tell them what not to do, and they're easier to control that way if you can control them sexually. So there's a lot of teachings and doctrine and expectations and conventions around how sex was conducted, and so that was a certain stage of development that humanity had to go through. And much of humanity is still at stage blue as a center of gravity. We've got stage orange next, which is what we typically think of as post-industrial revolution. This is modern capitalism. It's the success of the individual, performance, achievement, and each of these stages basically has a certain specific set of values. And so within stage orange, sex is seen as something that we need to perform, something that brings us pleasure. It's a form of conquest. It's used as a way of bolstering our sense of worth or our sense of self-importance. It's something that we end up competing for. And we can see the modern pornography industry is very stage orange. It sees sex as a product. And so a lot of human culture gets imprinted by this idea that sex is a commodity. It's performative. And it's a way of generating profit. It's very transactional. Stage green, what we can typically think of as the hippie movement or the modern, woke, the movement of pluralism, it's equality, it's postmodern. And within that comes sex as a form of connection. There's a certain tendency and an opening towards emotional healing, therapy. We start to play with and redefine gender norms and start to loosen the associations that we had around sexuality. So there's a healing and an empathy and an integration that comes with stage green, that adds those certain values onto sex. Sex becomes something that we need to work through and to heal, and all of these kind of healing modalities and therapy and this kind of lens is offering us something really important. It can also go too far in certain ways, but it's bringing this lens of there's something here that we need to heal. There's trauma. There's wounding. There's the repression from stage blue, and the sort of religious lens that we need to decompress from and integrate and heal. And there's also the wounding that comes from stage orange and the kind of pornography industry and the very performative, transactional nature of sex that we need to integrate. We need to change that. That's what stage green is trying to do, which is very useful, very important. Then we have stage yellow, which is known as tier 2. This is where systems thinking comes into play, and we start to see sex through the lens of integrative psychology. There's a deep understanding of the systems involved in the biology, the kind of relational and even spiritual dimensions of sexuality. Sex becomes something that we want to understand, to see its importance, to see how it plays out. And at stage yellow, we also start to see the lower stages of the spiral and the different value sets that are associated with sex at the different stages. And then at the top stage, stage turquoise or stage 8, we see sex as consciousness. There's a dissolution of duality at this stage. Stage turquoise is what we typically think of as the spiritual stage. It's about unity, a dissolution of the duality, and a moving, like a trajectory towards oneness. It's important to acknowledge that all of the stages, it's not better or worse, it's just different. And as we move up towards the higher stages, there tends to be a more integrative understanding. We're more accepting, we're moving towards unity, we're moving towards acceptance and integration. And it becomes less about right and wrong. The black and white thinking dissolves as we move up, and it becomes more about nuance and spectrum and integration. And this is important for us to understand because there's the vast bulk of humanity is still at stage blue and stage orange. Stage blue and stage orange. So that's important to understand because we can see that most of humanity relates to sex in either a very repressive, kind of religiously conditioned way, or as a very transactional, performative way. There's only something about 15% of the world's population is stage green, which is what we see in the modern in the online space a lot, where sex is being treated as something that needs to be healed. It's therapeutic. We're sort of bringing this lens of psychology and mixing these things and understanding that, okay, we need to relax. We need to relax our associations with sex. It's beautiful. It's part of life. We need to heal it. We need to relax our sort of like the tight grip and the associations and the repression that came with religion and traditional gender norms. This needs to go. And there's only maybe 5% of the human population that's at tier 2, stage yellow or turquoise. And so very few people are able to relate to sex in a way that is looking at it through the lens of systems, or looking at it through the lens of unity, consciousness, or spirituality. This is rare. It's very rare. And I remember having a key insight when I had a moment of awakening, which, we could see that as an emergence of the quality of consciousness that comes from stage turquoise, when you have a dissolution of the egoic identity. And I was contemplating this aspect of my sexuality from this point of view, and thinking, like, what is sex? Like, fundamentally, what is it? And from that state of consciousness, I was able to see that sex, in a certain way, was one of the primary divisions that occurs within consciousness that enables this game of creation. At the highest level, everything is one. There is just one unified field of consciousness. Consciousness is absolute, it's infinite. And somewhere along the way, there had to be a division in order for God to experience itself as separate, in order to have a self and an other, the experience of the other, to have a relationship with itself in a certain sense. God had to fragment itself by creating this game of life, by creating duality. And it's through this act of life, because what is life? Life is this constant process of evolution that is having sex with itself and reproducing itself and creating separate forms. And so it's through this expression of life that we actually create this duality and this experience of self and other. And yeah, this was like a profound understanding in a certain way, to understand, like, what is the purpose of sex? What is the purpose of life? And so the more, and I share this to explain that the more developed your consciousness becomes, the more capacity that we actually have to see the essence, the sacredness, or the primal root of life in a certain way. The more expansive your view becomes, the closer to reality you actually get. And that's why it's important that we actually do the work to move ourselves up the different stages of development, so that we can have the most expansive view. And if we're interested in truth, if we're interested in actually figuring out what reality is, what all of this means, who am I, we need to have the most expansive view. Because the more contracted our view is, the more limited it's going to be. The more expansive it is, the more we're moving towards unity, or the more we're able to experience states of oneness, the closer we're getting. Because the bigger it's getting, the more complete, the more total it becomes. And so what I discovered in this state was that by relating to sex in this way, and to seeing this like deep penetrating insight into the nature of sex, I was getting closer to the truth, or closer to the reality. And the reality at that stage was that it was something deeply sacred. It was like in that recognition was like a reverent quality, where the sacred nature of sex as being this expression of divine will, in a certain way, it was so obvious that that was something profoundly beautiful. And that the truth there was that sex is the expression of absolute love. It's absolute truth, absolute unity, goodness, beauty, intelligence, and love that enabled the emergence of life. Because when you look at life, when you actually look really closely at life, it's deeply, deeply mysterious. Like, we actually don't know how life even began. And the fact that life is so insanely intelligent, like you can just look at the structure of any kind of biological system. Like, look at the way a plant, like look at nature, look at the organization and the intricate details of the system of the human body. The brain interfacing with the, through the nervous system into the respiratory system into the digestive system, all of these interrelated systems working as like a fractal of the bigger system of life. It's profound. And it's able to reproduce itself and evolve into an infinite amount of different forms over millions of, like, it's just mind-boggling. And when you can look at it like that and see the intelligence, see the beauty, see the love that motivates all life, that becomes something extremely sacred. It's impossible to miss that somehow. And so one of the big sort of lies or the big mistakes that we get stuck in is seeing sex as something very transactional, seeing it as something very rudimentary, very primal, very animalistic. Which, of course, it is those things, but it's also, on the surface, it is those things. You could look at animals in nature fucking, and you just see that, oh, that's very primal. But if you look beyond the surface into the deeper mechanics of the intelligence and the beauty and the love that's being expressed there, it's immense. And so true sacred sexuality, in my view, is being able to see that which is primal or animalistic, or we could say low consciousness, and about integrating that with the highest truth, with the deepest understanding, and thereby seeing the interface of the way that life is designed, the biology and the consciousness of it, which creates this profound experience of the mystery. Like, it's deeply, deeply mysterious. Life is deeply mysterious, and the problem with so much of the way that we relate to life and to sex is that we see it through a very materialistic paradigm. Very scientific, rational, materialistic. This is stage orange. And that's where the majority of the center of gravity of humanity is. So we see sex in a certain very restrictive way, very mundane somehow. But it's so much more than that. So let's talk about how sex actually becomes sacred. Because we have this stage center of gravity with stage blue and stage orange in human history and human development at this stage. A lot of people, or most people, relate to sex as an experience of releasing tension, reproduction, a way to release a certain obligation or a duty, or as a means of escaping. And porn has done a lot of damage. Porn trains us to associate sex with performance. It's very transactional in nature, and we can see this with the kind of, if you look at most porn, it's just hard fucking, very focused on finishing or the money shot at the end. It's very rudimentary. And while, of course, there's nothing per se wrong with those things. There's nothing wrong with hard fucking or finishing. Those are certainly part of the spectrum of what's possible with sexuality. The kind of obsessive focus on that is often devoid of emotional or heart-based connection. There's a distinct lack of sensitivity. There's a lack of trauma awareness. There's a lack of love. The feminine gets objectified and dominated instead of revered. And a lot of what we see online and in porn is very patriarchal. It's very masculine dominated. And it's catering to men's desire very much, you know. And so there's a big limitation that comes with that, because that's the imprinting that most of us get as men. Most of us get conditioned with sex being that way. That's where we get most of our education. And so how do we transcend this conditioning and the center of gravity of the majority of human culture? Well, we need to experience sex from a higher state of consciousness. As I talked about the state of consciousness that I had to see a deep insight into the nature of sex, we need to access higher states of consciousness in order to have those kind of realizations. And if you don't know what that means, I did a whole episode breaking down the different states of consciousness from gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual, and explaining the distinctions of what happens to your mind and how do you relate to yourself and life or reality from different states of consciousness. And so that's really important, because our state of consciousness determines what we see, how we see. If we are, and most of us exist in the gross state of consciousness for 97% or something of our entire lives. We spend in the gross state, primarily. And so we want to be able to transition out of the gross state into more subtle, causal, or non-dual states of consciousness and see sex through those lenses. And the cool part about this is that sex is actually a vehicle for changing our state. By having sex, we actually start to put ourselves in touch with more of the subtle. We become more sensitive. We become more attuned to sensation. We start opening up to pleasure. We feel a certain expansion. We have an orgasm. And that orgasm it generates a high kind of emotional state, you know. It's profound, it's blissful, it's expansive, it's very, very pleasurable. And our mind, you know, look at what happens to the mind in those moments. Your mind like dissolves. You have this release. It's very, very blissful and euphoric. And so our consciousness in those moments is doing something. It's doing something different. That's why we actually like sex. That's why it feels so good. Because we actually escape, even for a small window of time, the normal, gross, waking state of consciousness and step into a different frame of consciousness. And the problem that we encounter there is that most of our orgasms are very short. It's just a few seconds. You know, we have that brief glimpse into something that lies beyond, and that's like, oh yeah, it feels so fucking good. And then it's over. But what if you could stay in that orgasmic state for way longer? Much, much, much longer. We need to amplify that state. We need to expand and extend the amount of time that we spend in that blissful orgasmic state. Just like if we're meditating, we don't just want to meditate for 2 minutes. Actually, it takes a good 30 minutes just to get into the meditation, just to actually start meditating. Because for the first half an hour, you're usually just going around and round in your head, jumping from one thought to the next. And then maybe after 30 minutes or an hour, you actually break through into a state of no mind, no thoughts. And that becomes very blissful, very expansive, because we've stabilized ourselves in the subtle or the causal state of consciousness. So we had a breakthrough into a different state. And the same thing applies to sex. If we have a very fast, hard, climactic experience of sex, of course, that is going to be a very brief window of access into a higher state of consciousness. But if we can expand the state of the orgasm and spend much longer in that experience, then we can actually start to access something. Then we can start to see and understand and experience something deeper. And this is why the practice of semen retention and orgasms without ejaculation are an integral part of sacred sexuality. Because first of all, it helps us to contain the energy. So instead of releasing and ejaculating, we're actually containing that energy. And then with that containment comes an expansion of our consciousness. If we can avoid the discharge and the dumping of all of that energy that comes with ejaculation, we will feel very, very full of energy. And it's through this energization, combined with a certain stillness and silence and the refined emotions that come with pleasure, the love, the awe, the ecstasy, that we start to unlock an altered state of consciousness. If you can have orgasms without ejaculation and have several orgasms in a row, that can be a half an hour experience of just being in absolute ecstasy. And you'll start to pierce through into the subtle, causal, or perhaps even the non-dual state of consciousness. And from those states, then we start to access the deeper fabric of existence. We start to have deep, deep penetrating insights into our true nature. And in this way, sex can become a certain form of spiritual practice. And it's by entering those states that we actually start to see our lover as a mirror of the divine, or as a mirror of God, sitting opposite you. And this is where we see that the split of duality, because you have the self and you have the other, which is opposite to you, and the part of the game of creation, or lila, as it's known, is this dance of duality, self and other, me and the world. But if we can access this from a higher state of consciousness, we actually start to dissolve that sense of separation. You start to see your lover through the eyes of love, and that separation starts to collapse. You start to feel a state of oneness. You start to feel in perfect unity or union with your beloved. You experience almost like a state of non-duality, like the sense of separation collapse. That's why when we make love, we often feel like we're one. The two becomes one. And this is the essential distinction of like duality becoming non-duality, not two, non-dual. And so there's a profound experience there. There's a profound truth to be found in those moments. And so sex can become the gateway to discovering the absolute truth, which is that reality is one. Consciousness is one. You are part of the field of consciousness, and you have deceived yourself, or part of the game of creation is this deception that you are separate, which is we walk around all of the time thinking that we're this separate autonomous agent within reality, when in fact you are the whole thing. And in the right state of consciousness, that duality collapses and you see reality through a completely different lens, and it's all you, it all becomes you. Your lover is a part of you, the room around you is a part of you. Everything that you thought was separate to you is actually part of you. Your consciousness is completely entangled with everything that you perceive. And the sense of separation is an illusion. And so what we want, and this is what becomes possible if you do a lot of deep state meditation. This is what becomes possible when you have psychedelic experiences. You will have the direct experience of reality dissolving in the way that you normally see it, and it's a complete mindfuck. It's profound. And we want those experiences because that is what makes our perspective of reality and our interpretation of the world around us so much more expanded. We stop seeing it through the lens of stage orange rationality and scientific materialism, and we start to see it as a deeply metaphysical experience or phenomena. Boundaries dissolve, the mind's associations start to relax and loosen, and you can even have an ego death where the sense of you that you think you are dissolves, and yet you remain. And that's how you discover the absolute truth. You will have a realization. And that's where we discover what is truly sacred. And so that's what all sacred sexuality is actually pointing towards. This is the whole point, It's not just a fancy way of, spicing up your relationship. It's not just about the eye gazing. It's not just about the rituals. It's not just about having epic sex. It's about going deeper into that and using sex as a vehicle to have a penetrating insight into the nature of reality, where we can actually dissolve the sense of separation, dissolve duality, and experience oneness. So if that's something you want to do, here is a simple step-by-step process to have or to set that up, to actually practice sacred sexuality. You can do this with a partner or you can do it without a partner. It's obviously going to be, it can be very effective both ways. You can do it. I've had very profound experiences with myself practicing sacred sexuality or relating to myself from heightened states of consciousness and working with my sexual energy to have profound insights. And I've also had really profound, beautiful experiences with my partner as well. There's a kind of idea within sacred sexual circles is that it has to be a masculine feminine partner dynamic, the divine masculine with the divine feminine dissolving into unity. And that's actually not true. That's one way. And at the same time, all of the kind of rituals, and there's a lot of dogma, there's a lot of belief, and there's a lot of baggage that comes with it. There's a lot of extra. At the essence of it, it's about your consciousness and the state of consciousness that you're in and how you relate to sex in general. And using sex, using pleasure, using that expansive nature of the energy when it's contained and when it's experienced as orgasmic pleasure, to expand your consciousness with that. So you can do that with in a masculine feminine dynamic. You can also do it in a male male or female female dynamic. You can also do that just by yourself with your own energy, with your own consciousness. It actually doesn't make a difference. And if someone tells you that it does, then there's probably a bunch of dogma that you might want to question about that. If they demonize, the sacred sexual practices that I was a part of in the past, they demonized men with other men. They said that homosexuality is demonic. Which fundamentally, if you really think about it, it doesn't actually make sense. Why would that stop the states of consciousness from unfolding? And at the end of the day, if that's If that's true, then you need to test and experience it for yourself to try and see if it is going to limit your energy from expanding or your state of consciousness from shifting. So don't just believe what anyone says. You need to always test for yourself to validate any kind of truth claim. And the same goes for this. The same goes for anything that I tell you. Validate it for yourself, see if it works. Maybe it will, maybe it won't work for you, and you need to find a different path. And that's still useful, you know. That's the experiment. So if you want to approach sacred sexuality, here is a simple blueprint for doing it. First of all, you need to create a container, some sort of container about that creates a field or creates a certain frame for this experience to unfold. Just like sacred practices are always held within the container of a church or a ritual or some sort of procession, there's a certain intention that comes to creating a boundaried container where a specific action takes place. And this is the same for sacred sexuality. Obviously, sex is a sensitive topic. It's something very intimate and personal. So it's important that we set the right intention. It's not about getting somewhere. It's about being fully here, fully present in the now, grounded down into your direct experience, being very present with your nervous system, with your breath, and by, as a general principle, slowing everything down. We need to be attentive and to establish, if it's with another person, we want to establish boundaries and consent. Safety is really, really important here because obviously we can't surrender if we don't feel safe. You might like to include some beautiful, refined, elevated music. You obviously don't want to be disturbed, so you want to have privacy. You might want to have some mood lighting. Basically anything that helps you, helps to signal to your mind that this is a special moment. This is a moment to drop in and get really present. I'm not going to be distracted. And I'm going to give myself plenty of time to allow that expansion process to occur, just as I would if I was approaching a meditation. All of the pomp and all of the ritual and all of the, the frills actually has nothing to do with it. It's actually irrelevant. Only that it has a way that signals to your mind that, hey, this is something non-ordinary. I'm actually going to break my association with the normal waking state of consciousness. I'm going to try to access something different. So a bit of music, a nice mood and setting. If you want to bring flowers or create a certain ritual around this with your lover, that can also be beautiful. Anything that helps you to get in the state, anything that helps you to set that kind of intention. That, hey, something special is going to happen here. I'm going to be really present. I'm going to drop in and I'm going to see what's here for me. Step number 2 is really prioritizing presence over any kind of performance. So we can start with some eye contact. We can start with breath, synchronizing the breath with our partner. You might like to start with mindful touch. Something kind of somatic and emotional, anything that's really authentic, that's going to help you make space for whatever's true for you in the present moment or true for your lover. I think it's really important that we meet what is arising. So we need to feel what's happening in the body rather than just relating to this from a very mental space. I think it's really important to drop in and just be super present. Whatever it is that helps you to do that. Maybe you need to have a conversation. Maybe you need to, talk about some stuff. Maybe your partner needs, there has to be a certain foreplay, and that doesn't need to be sexual. It might just be emotional. It might be conversational. Anything that allows you to both drop in and be really present, or you yourself to drop in and be really present. The next stage, I think it's really important to have awareness over your energy. We need to learn to be with arousal and to see that primary urge to express our desire is fuel. That's something very potent. I mean, just look at how much that motivates us in life, makes us do a lot of different things. So that speaks to the value of this energy. It's very, very it's the engine that drives all of life and reproduction of life. So there's a fuel there. There's a very potent fuel there. And so this is where the practice of semen retention is really important for men. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it helps a lot to contain that energy and to learn how to circulate some of that energy around. If we can slow down the whole experience and extend the amount of time that we experience pleasure, and we can even start to have orgasms without ejaculation, which is a possible thing, and I'll have a future episode talking about exactly the technique for doing that. You're going to basically expand the possibility for you to experience these very profound, ecstatic, prolonged states. And if we avoid ejaculation and build that energy over 30 minutes, an hour, maybe even longer, you can approach this for as long as you like, basically. I've had sexual experiences that lasted, several hours, where that energy was contained, and it's like entering, just like you would if you wanted to do a really profound meditation. You do a vipassana, you do a long sit of meditation or an entire day of meditating. The more time that you spend in that state, the deeper your state is going to get, the more profound your awareness will be, and the more chance you have of really discovering something sacred. So containment becomes the fuel for the expansion of consciousness in the present moment. And when you can learn to direct that energy through your entire body, you can choose where to place it. You can use it to expand the feelings of your heart and to dissolve and open and expand that. You can send it up to your mind and have a very transcendent state. You can also use that kind of technique of directing your energy and pulling it from down there and moving it. You can use it to move it through your partner, and you can circulate energy between the two of you, which can be really, very profound, very blissful, very expansive. And that can aid the process of dissolving yourself into one another. It's also really important to have, as I said, the heart connection. We want to actually connect the primal aspect, that lust and our desire, with the qualities of our heart, to essentially elevate and refine what we feel. And it's by energizing that feeling of love and empathy and reverence that enables us to feel this state of merging, the state of expansion, and the state of dissolution into one another. And that's something that, love, love as a quality is about unity. Love, if I love something, I have no desire to change that thing. That thing is perfect the way that it is. And in the act of loving, I'm dissolving into, it's like I'm merging with the beauty and the perfection of that thing. And as I dissolve and merge with that thing, it's such a profound acceptance. There's no need to it to be any other way. It's just like I fall into that thing. That's why they call it falling in love. And that enables us to enter a deep state of devotion. And so remember, as the bigger picture, sex is the experience of unification, the melting and the merging towards oneness. So we want to see our partner as a divine mirror in a certain way. And ultimately, everything we see is a divine mirror. From the right state of consciousness, you can see everything as a manifestation of the one. Only that we forget, we fall into our frame of dissolution or the frame of separateness. And so when we're with our lover, we actually have one of the best opportunities to look past that, because you're already in love, hopefully. And when you're already in love with something, it's so much easier to dissolve into it, you know? It's going to be much harder for me to dissolve into this pen or to someone that I'm not in love with because that state of love isn't there, you know, unless I've trained myself to. So your lover is like an access gateway, you know, because you're already deeply in love with this person, hopefully. If you're not in love with this person, you shouldn't make love to them. You know, it's not going to be sacred sexuality. So choose someone that you naturally feel love emerging from inside of you, and it's so easy. You know, it's so easy to fall into them and to dissolve into them because you already have this profound state of unity or union with them. It's also really important to take care how the practice, if we could frame it like that, is closed. So it's really important that we initiate some form of aftercare. There's a process of winding down and reintegration into separation. You might have a very profound state of unity and merging with one another. This can also bring up different traumas, fears, and difficult emotional states. It can be grief, it can be crying, it can be catharsis. And it can also be destabilizing and scary for the ego. You know, if you have a state of non duality, that is a mind fuck. And so it's really important that we're very attentive to giving ourselves the necessary time to integrate from those experiences, to come down, to come back into our bodies, to create safety and make sure that that container is preserved and things are brought to a natural conclusion. You also might like to share and talk about what you experienced afterwards to process and engage the process of sense making. You might like to keep it personal and private. It might be difficult for you to even articulate what you experienced. And so maybe afterwards you also might like to journal and to deepen your understanding or to, you know, do that process of sense making and record what it is that you accessed. Obviously, this is something that you don't just do once. It's something that you repeat again and again and again, just like you would with meditation. It's not something you do once. I mean, one time is better than none, but obviously the most profound results come from sustained practice over time. So that's a very simple schematic for approaching sexuality in a sacred way. Now, I also want to mention here some warnings because sex is a very vulnerable topic. This is an area where a lot of us carry wounding and the dysfunction of the negative conditioning that we received from either religion or from mainstream culture, pornography, and all of the things that happen to us in life. People go through a lot sexually. It's a very sensitive topic. So there's also a lot of shadow in the space. There's a lot of unconscious psychological desires and motivations that emerge into the space of sex. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility. And unfortunately, I've seen this a lot, a lack of responsibility. This is where, you know, there's a lot of people who predate on or in communities where sacred sexual practices are common. There's a lot of people that will use this as a gateway to get their needs met in manipulative, controlling, or exploitive kind of ways. I've seen lots of people posing as teachers or gurus and taking advantage of their position, using the banner of sacred sexuality to express or to meet their unconscious needs without acknowledgement or integration of the shadows, and causing a lot of pain, causing a lot of trauma, and manipulating people under the guise of sacred sexuality. So, of course, you know, of course, given the level of consciousness and the development of most of humanity is comparatively low on the scale, we need to be aware of that. We need to be lucid and grounded in reality, is that most people relate to sex in a way which is pretty transactional, selfish, often manipulative and exploitative, and this area is very shady. It's ripe for people getting taken advantage of, especially women, but also men. And so when we're approaching this, we need to assume this responsibility, and we need to ground all of this in maturity and ethics. So whenever you're working with sex or people's energies in this way, or there's a certain power dynamic with teachers and students, there is just a huge temptation to misapply these practices. It's extremely common. And sacred sexuality without proper integration easily becomes manipulation and escapism and abuse. The ego has an infinite capacity for hijacking spirituality, as I talked about in the series, in the episode that I did about spiritual bypassing. The ego loves to weaponize spiritual teachings and claim that it is very enlightened and very awakened, therefore I'm free to do whatever I want. And it will use spiritual teachings as a way to justify that. And a lot of people who seek spiritual teachings are using it as a way to heal and to avoid suffering and to transcend their traumas. And so it requires a lot of discernment, a lot of, impeccable boundaries, a lot of self-reflection and humility, if we're actually going to do it in a loving way. Because real love has no desire to control, no need to manipulate, will never force, will never abuse. That's not love. And power without love is corruption. And if we have just love without any kind of sense of autonomy or power or agency, then we will collapse. And, obviously we're responsible for the situations that we put ourselves in. And we need to make sure that we're not naive. And real sacred sexuality is the integration of power and love. It's consciousness. It's consciousness. So, yeah, I think this is important, just really important to mention. And if you are going to approach sacred sexuality, or you're assessing people who are working with sacred sexuality, you need to be radically honest. You need to be really transparent. There needs to be a high degree of respect and impeccable integrity, because the lines get very, very blurry very, very quickly. And so if you are stepping into this space, you also need to lead and model that. You need to lead impeccably. You need to hold immaculate boundaries and really take radical responsibility for your own desires and your own actions, as well as the impact that they have on others. And never, never, never use spirituality to justify unconscious behavior, because that's anti-spiritual, in fact. And so if you see that happening, be a champion of truth and call that shit out, because we don't need the sacred being tainted by, unconsciousness and shadow. That's a bastardization of the beauty and the wisdom and the love that should emerge and needs to emerge from these kind of practices. So I think we all need to take responsibility for that and be champions of that. So I hope you found this valuable. This was my best take. I really struggle with these episodes sometimes, because I'm trying to transmit so much in a short period of time, and every time I create an episode, I'm already criticizing it and seeing 10 things that I did wrong with it. So these are always just the best that I can do at the time that I'm doing it. So I hope you found this valuable. The invitation here is to obviously take this on as an experiment for yourself, to bring this new level of reverence and intention towards your intimacy, towards your relationship, towards sex in general, and see for yourself if you can catch or you can find or sense or access the mystery, that sacred essence of life being constantly expressed through you, but that is usually just hidden under the layers of the mind and the associations and the predominant level of consciousness that we're at. There is so much more underneath the surface if you create the conditions for yourself to explore that. And it's brought me an immense amount of satisfaction, joy, and completely transformed the way that I make love, the way that I relate to the feminine, the way that I relate to myself. It's brought an immense amount of healing to a part of me that has always been wounded by culture, wounded by trauma and my early sexual experiences. So please leave a comment. Let me know how this landed for you. If you have questions, drop them below and I'll address them in future episodes, or I'll respond to those comments if it's appropriate. If you can leave a review for the channel and give me some stars, or say some words about it, would be very, very grateful for that support. And thank you for those of you that have done that. If you want to join a group of men, if you're a man doing this work and you want to be surrounded by other men who are championing this approach and aspiring towards these ideals, you might like to come and join my men's group. We're doing No Nut November as a practice of becoming more conscious about our sexual energy and how that gets expressed in the world and in our relationships, and harnessing that fuel towards our personal growth and development. And that's super powerful. So if that resonates, come and join us. We meet every single week to talk about these topics. And if you're in a personal place of difficulty or up against certain challenges in your relationship or in your own personal growth and development, you might like to reach out for one-on-one coaching with me. I've still got a couple of spaces for that in the next period of time. So if you want mentorship and you feel like that would be beneficial to you, it's an extremely powerful container that I create for men who are ready to dive in and make some big transformations. Lastly, let me leave you with a final frame to close this out. So to finish off this episode, I want to make a really, really, really important distinction. There is a huge difference between wanting, believing, or thinking something is sacred and the direct experience of the sacred. These are not the same thing. And if we look around the world, we can see a lot of religious traditions and different lineages or teachers doing rituals and prayers and mantras based on belief in the god or the goddess, or faith in the holy book or the prophet. And these beliefs and these prayers and these rituals emerge from thousands of years of tradition. And so we assume that that is valuable. We assume that there's truth there. But the key word here is belief and faith. This is not the same thing as having a direct experience or higher state of consciousness that puts you in direct contact with the absolute, or with the truth, capital T, truth. When your mind opens enough to contact the absolute truth, or you have that direct experience, or in other words, you have an awakening, or a non-dual state of consciousness, or a God realization, there's no need for faith. There's no room for belief, because it's a direct experience. It's undeniable. It's pure knowing. It'll be the most real and profound moment of your entire life. It'll be more real than whatever it is that you're looking at and experiencing right now. That's why they call it divine ecstasy. That's why they call it enlightenment. That's why they call it awakening. Because it's the process of waking up to a higher order of consciousness, a higher state of consciousness. And it's the greatest happiness, the most profound expansion that you could possibly imagine. And until you have such a state of consciousness, until you have a direct experience like that, until you have an awakening, all the sacred intentions, all the mantras and all the prayers and all the, you know, all of this, all of the ritual that we apply towards sacred sexuality, all the meditation and the twin flames and the divine union with our beloveds, all of that stuff, it's just imitation. It's imitation of what's possible. It's faking it until you make it, so to speak. It's just going through the motions. Which isn't to say that there's something wrong with those things. It's still better to fake it until you make it than to not fake it at all. But you need to, this is why this is such a crucial distinction to make. You actually really need to have some sort of awakening to actually understand what the words sacred or divine or absolute or infinity or capital T truth are pointing towards. And once you actually have one of those experiences, once you have a proper awakening, then this whole concept of what sacred means takes on an infinitely more tangible and meaningful depth, because you've actually experienced it. You've actually had the connection to the ultimate essence or the absolute truth of existence. And that's a very different thing from the idea of it or the belief or the faith in it. And in that moment, the truth, the realization that, the waking up to that realization, that profound understanding, will be the most sacred thing you've ever experienced, because it's absolute beauty, it's absolute intelligence, it's infinite love. And you have the recognition that you are all of it. You are that. And it is everything. And in that moment, all sense of separation, all the experience of the other will be recognized as an illusion. And in that state, all sense of, disunity or otherness, all of that dissolves into a perfect state of unity. That's what it means to be non-dual. And that's what this approach towards lovemaking encourages, right? Two bodies, two hearts, two minds becoming one, dissolving into one another until there is no separation. And that absolute love, that absolute truth, that's what you can discover. That's what's on offer here. That's the light at the end of the tunnel somehow. That's the ultimate essence that exists. And don't just believe me. I could be full of shit. This might just be woo woo. For some of you, this might be too woo. What's this guy talking about? He's full of shit. Maybe. But here I'm sharing my experience with you, what I've discovered, because you should know that it's a possibility. There's people that claim that it's possible, so that already should open in your mind a curiosity loop. It's a question, an unanswered question. What if he's telling the truth? What if there is absolute love? What if the absolute nature of reality is the capital T truth, and I could discover that for myself? And if it's true, how do I do it? I've done it. And I want to share with you how I did it. That's what I'm trying to do here. I'm sharing the whole path, the whole process, so that you can do the experiments for yourself. And the best part is it's not that hard. It's not that hard to get some sort of breakthrough that opens the doorway into an entirely new paradigm of being and life and relating. And that will completely redefine how you approach absolutely everything. So if that's your vibe, if that resonates with you, then stick around. That's what this channel is all about. And over the years to come, I'll share my entire path, all my lessons, all my experiments, and how you can run these tests for yourself and discover what's there for you.